Well, we turn our spotlight tonight on two activists who have dedicated their lives to advocating for transgender rights and visibility. Susan Gapka and Fae Johnstone have worked tirelessly to challenge societal norms and break down barriers for the trans community. Here's our conversation about their unique challenges and remarkable journeys. Susan Gapka is with me in studio, and Fae Johnstone is with us from Ottawa. Thank you both so much for joining me today to have this conversation. You know, you both represent two generations in the fight for LGBTQ plus rights and representation. But I want to start with you, Susan, and your story, because you have a really interesting one. Where did this all begin for you?
Well, just a little bit about my background. I grew up in the Quinte region on a military base, Trenton, Ontario. Ran away from home, as many of us did back then. Didn't feel I could be myself. Came to the big city lights, and well, I got to tell you, the big city lights got a hold of me. And so I ended up homeless on the streets of Toronto for 10 years. And when I got off the streets, I had a lot of supports in my life. Not like it was when I was growing up. And I realized that wanting to live my life as a woman and call myself Susan was not a passing phase. So I came out about 25 years ago. 25
years ago. And when you were on the streets, tell me about that, how difficult it was. And were you kind of wrestling with your identity at that time?
I had a chronic alcohol and drug addiction. Yeah. And because I was trying to cover something up. And I didn't have the supports in my life to deal with that. And I realized that if I wanted to live, I would have to leave that behind. And so once I had supports and seeing social workers and getting supports for, I got into housing, there was this gnawing feeling inside of me ever since I was a youngster with a clear mind that indeed I felt like I needed to take action and live my life. And I became Susan Gapka.
You became Susan Gapka. And Fae, when did you become Fae?
So I came out of the closet as trans when I was 20, but I actually came out as gay initially in my middle teen years. I grew up in small military towns and on bases as well, and it was a fairly conservative space, but moved to Ottawa for high school, and that was when I found out I wasn't a straight person, but knew that something still wasn't right. There was a sense that I was hiding myself, and I was struggling with my own experiences of depression, of suicidality, and a lot of bullying as well. But then when I came out as gay, a lot of that changed. And then when I came out as trans, it finally felt like I was living as my authentic and honest self.
Huh. You know, Susan, you talked about homelessness and realizing that you were trans. Do those two things, homelessness and being trans, intersect sometimes?
Well, I think I separated them in my mind a lot, and it really gives me a sense of the desperation that's happening outside our walls as we speak, of people sleeping in parks. I can remember what that felt like and how lonely and isolated that was. But I started getting social supports because I didn't want that to happen again. Yeah. And then with all the support of people in my life, in my new life, I was able to take that step and talk to one or two people close to me. And once I went outside as Susan, I didn't know who I was. Well, Susan was the name I always wanted. Didn't know how it would work out, but it was just like a whole new world opening up, like a flower that hadn't gotten water. I suddenly felt like I could live my true colors.
And Fae, I know that you both connected because of the work that you do with advocacy. Talk to me about that, and talk to me how that connection happened and the work that you are doing in the space.
So I can't remember exactly when Susan and I first crossed paths, but I was very keen in my early 20s to do advocacy on queer and trans issues, largely because of my own experiences and the fear and horrors that I went through when I first, stepped out of the closet as Fae, and just feeling like the whiplash of how people treat you so radically differently because you change your gender. That feeling of scrutiny and fear when you walk outside and live your life. And that, to me, has really powered my advocacy, because no one should have to be afraid to be themselves. No one should have to worry about their safety as they walk home, or about how their family might treat them because they're being who they know themselves to be.
And Faye, did you worry in those early years about your safety?
Absolutely. You know, I remember my legs shaking the first time I went out. I was in my apartment. I had a lovely roommate, and they helped me find the courage to step outside, looking a little bit more like I do today, but with much worse eyebrows. And everything was shaking. Like, I literally, like, I almost had an anxiety attack. And the troubling thing is, I don't think that's gone away. I think I've just gotten used to it. And that's something I see in a lot of trans folks is the world outside is not nice to us,
right,
but it becomes a new normal, and we become hardened to it. So I still worry about my safety. I still, you know, every month there's at least a few instances of folks saying slurs or, you know, laughing at me or other unpleasant things. But you get used to it. But it's the kind of thing you shouldn't ever have to get used to.
To Faye's point about safety, did you ever face dangerous situations in those early years?
Well, yes. This is where my life on the streets comes in handy.
Yeah.
It's not my best quality, but I certainly know how to defend myself.
All right.
And also I talked about athletics, sports and recreation, that I have, it gives me a sense of physical confidence, that if I have to, it gives me that confidence. But I try to de-escalate nowadays rather than escalate. But after spending so many decades of my life afraid of my own shadow, I refuse to let that happen for me anymore.
I want to talk to you both now about, you know, what is happening right now in Alberta. The Alberta government released a plan to put limitations on gender-affirming care for minors. And of course, as you know, you both have been on the show. We've talked about this. It's a controversial announcement. You know, some in the trans community who were supportive of this move came on the show as well. We had a trans columnist saying that she was supportive of this. What do you think about that, and also just in general about the changes to this, these policies? And Faye, I'll start with you.
You know, we are a diverse community. I think it's important to remember that trans folks don't belong to any political party, or any particular political party or political ideology. Most of us just want to live our lives. Many trans folks don't pay attention to politics. And I know we've talked about the details of the policy before, so I almost want to take a step back and think about the environment that they happened in. Yes. This is a country where we're seeing year-over-year increases in hate-motivated violence, where trans folks are being targeted by, you know, far-right groups and organizations. I'm tired of receiving death threats, and I am tired of having horrible things said about me and about my friends and my family. And so that's the environment this is happening in, a world where, while we've come so far and carved out so much space for my generation, and particularly those coming next, we're seeing that space taken away now, constricted. And a lot of those same tropes from the 70s and the 80s, where you should be scared of gay people, they're being weaponized against trans people again today. Do you think, Faye, and I'll keep with you on this question, do you think, though, you know, to the earlier point about the Julie Malott, who was here, who was, you know, saying that in large part she agrees with Danielle Smith. Do you think that there's nuance to the debate? Because as you said, you know, the trans community is not one community. There are people who have different opinions, obviously, right? Absolutely, and there is nuance, and yes. I think it's important to remember, you know, in my books, the policies that we had before were the nuanced policies. They weren't governments putting themselves between families and the doctor and the health care that kids need. They weren't governments forcing trans kids back into the closet if they didn't feel comfortable or ready coming out at home. And so we had a nuanced approach. What we have now is a government and a premier that's trying to shore up support within social conservatives and using trans kids as a political prop to do so. Okay, so Susan, yes. You know, oftentimes these days, and it's not just this debate, but many debates, there are silos that are set up, and people, you know, talk in silos. How do we have a conversation around this, you know, with that nuance that Faye talked about?
Fairly with challenge. Yeah. I think we need to be talking about human beings and people like Faye and I putting ourselves out in the public eye, sharing our personal stories, talking about why it's so important for others to have the same opportunities that we have had. That indeed, that in the past we've come under this gay marriage. There's like, Protect the Children has been such a long time attack on vulnerable communities. This is a community that is vulnerable and at risk, but mainstream media and opposition, and we've been talking about this policy for the last week.
Yeah.
We're not talking about affordable jobs in Alberta. How are we going to be able to buy groceries? What about the healthcare system? So it's a real distraction and putting young people at risk.
Yeah.
And I feel the future is bright because I've come through a struggle. Fae has come through struggles. Many others like us have come out as spokespersons. I don't want to go back. And I want to make sure that we do that all together.
And Fae, you know, are you concerned that genuine good faith debate is at risk here?
Absolutely. I think that we are in a time of rising polarization, misinformation, disinformation, and conspiracy. But I also think we're losing sight of the kids that we should be talking about here. You know, we know the vast majority of parents support their kids. But I hear the stories from like the 14 and 15-year-old trans folks and the service providers who work with them. And those kids are terrified and their voices are not heard in these debates and conversations. Trans folks don't come into this with an even playing field. You know, folks have anxiety and stigma around us. And so we always have to, we have to build those relationships. And it's not always easy to do so.
Susan, you know, when we have conversations about social justice, inequality, on this issue and others, we often hear, we're not there yet. Do you think we will get there?
Oh, it's a journey. It's a journey for all of us. And I think like we're going to have these conversations, we'll do public education and what it's really like to be trans and non-binary children, want to send a message out to families, and really a call to action for families and young people and people who protect them. We're in this together.
Fae, I know that you and Susan have had many conversations. You've built a friendship now. What have you learned from her and her kind of long view of the situation? I know she calls herself a trans elder.
And she absolutely is. She's an icon in our community. I don't know, there's so many victories that we've had that I don't think would be there in the same way without Susan. But I think she's also helped me get perspective. I am a 28-year-old trans lady, and I've had my struggles, but I also have to recognize how much better it is to be me in this age and how much easier it is than it has been for so many before. And so she's given me that perspective, and I think a lot of folks, we need that right now because, they've come for us time and time again, and every time we've come through and we've kept fighting for a more free, equal, and socially just world. So there's a lot to be afraid of right now, but we're going to build that world together. We've done it before, we'll do it again.
I'm going to give the last word to you, Susan. I can see you get a bit emotional there when Fae was talking about you, but I wonder what your words of advice are as you pass the baton, so to speak, to Fae and younger generations when it comes to this continued fight.
Well, I never thought I'd live to be over 30 years of age, and here I am, more than double that. We'll leave the numbers as a secret. That'll be our secret. But for younger people, families wondering about what the future holds, the history tells us that we are a resilient community. Those of us who survive, we are pretty darn strong and stubborn too. I was pretty stubborn. And so it's that resilience of overcoming and surviving that'll get us through. And in the long end of it, or at the end of the long day, we will still be here. Trans people have been here since the beginning of time. We're not going away anytime soon. So we will struggle, we will survive, and we will overcome.
Susan Gapka, Fae Johnstone, thank you both so much. Appreciate the time.
Thank you, Travis.